8 points, comparable to those in 2017 and 2018. And it really just shows the crossroads that the 49ers are at right now.
Yeah, they got plenty of guys you want their jerseys of. That is the difference. This is a team with McCaffrey and Bosa, and we all Kittle. We go down the list: Purdy, Debo, Fred Warner. But they are at a different stage in this run. They are at a moment. I'll go back. That first half, at least the beginning of the first half, reminded me of the pre-Shanahan era. I have not seen a 49ers team that had no chance. Now, there were some of those early Shanahan era games, but you knew how little talent they had, and you knew they were coached pretty well. And if they just got a quarterback, and boom, they get Jimmy Garoppolo, and things change even in that first season. But man, it just felt like they were overwhelmed. They were out-coached slightly, or majorly, whichever way you want to put it, and a little loss of will. Now, they rallied back, played better in the second half and end of the first half, but it just looked like they weren't up to this. And that you don't really haven't felt that about a Shanahan team. Even that 6-10 season, David, in the COVID year, didn't feel like this because they were gutting through games, and Nick Mullins was pulling out a couple of games. Remember the Raiders game? This one felt a little bit like a loss of will. Now, I'm not saying that they're throwing innings. I do think there's fight in this team. I think maybe they can play a tough game in Buffalo, but that's going to be a tough situation. At night, Buffalo coming off a bye,
Snow.
49ers, snow, cold. You know what that crowd's going to be like, and you don't know who's healthy, right? Even if Purdy plays, one hit on his shoulder, he might be out. You don't know if Bosa is going to play. Don't know if Trent Williams is going to play. Don't know what shape a lot of other guys are in. It's difficult. And, if you're losing even a percentage of faith in the locker room, that kind of game might spill it over the edge. We shall see. I got into a little tussle with a lot of 49ers fans when I said mathematically odds are diminishing. They are only one game out in the NFC West. I don't understand the anger or the pushback. They're behind 3 teams. And when you're behind 3 teams, that's not really one game back. You're one game back, or like a half game back of the Rams, of all of them. You need all of them to lose a bunch of games. That's a little different. The math is tough. That's why they're like a 15% chance to make the playoffs. They lose Sunday night, it'll be lower, not that much lower, because these models do bake in a loss, but it's still not going to be good. It's not going to be good for the mood, David. What do you think the mood is? What was the mood of that locker room after Sunday's game?
Christian McCaffrey, I wrote about this up on the Standard. I still remember the Super Bowl where Christian looked like a ghost. He was backed up against his locker stall, just looking through everything, and he didn't move for what seemed like 45 minutes after the Super Bowl, a color out of his face. He wasn't like that after this game, but it struck me that everybody had gone to the bus. The place is empty, and Christian is sitting there in front of his locker, and he's just stewing. Now, I wasn't going to walk up to him at the Super Bowl. That was a whole different kind of grief after that loss. But this game, I walked up to him and I talked to him for a little bit, and he murmured. He didn't really talk all that loud, and he was just angry. He was just very upset, and he made it really clear that he didn't think it was the quarterback in this game. I think the 49ers have a good team culture where they're not going to throw individual players under the bus. But I did sense, just reading in between the lines, there's a lot of frustration with the run game and the run blocking in this game. And I think you could tell when Kyle Shanahan was talking as well. And then you just watch the tape, especially with Jake Brendel and Aaron Banks. They are not opening up and reaching this. They're not opening up the holes that they have opened up in the past because they're not effectively reaching the second level. And then the whole offense, regardless of whether or not they have Brock Purdy, but the whole offense is predicated on winning up front at those key areas, even for the plays that run to the perimeter. And if that's collapsing, then the foundation just isn't there that the 49ers normally have. And I think that's why even prior to this game with Purdy around, some of those runs, like the Deebo Samuel end around runs, aren't working because they're not winning enough at the point of attack. And Purdy can mask a lot, but as we saw, because they just lost by 4 touchdowns without him. But even when he was still in there, this obviously wasn't the healthy 49ers offensive pass. It was, so much of what they're doing, Tim, right now, this is over the course of the whole year, is different than in the past. For example, the yards after the catch, they ranked dead last in the entire NFL. This was a team that ranked first for years on end. The quarterback is holding on to the ball much longer because their separation numbers are way down. Stylistically, things have changed so much. So I think there's anger when you go into this locker room from some of the veterans like Christian McCaffrey, because they're upset at the process behind all this. They're upset that, you know, he'll just say we didn't play well, but you can read into what we didn't play well means when you look at how stylistically different the 49ers are. And that applies to the other side of the ball too. You mentioned it seemed that this was a different type of loss, and that's because they couldn't stop the run.
Yep.
Anytime that you get whipped on the ground as a defense, and I think it was 125 yards in the first half for the Packers in the run game, 7 yards a carry, is really comparable to what Raheem Mostert and the 49ers did to Green Bay in 2019 in that first half in the NFC Championship game. And anytime that you lose in that kind of fashion, it feels worse because it is worse. Because
Well,
you've lost the very essence of football. You've lost at the line of scrimmage.
well, yeah, that's the whole Shanahan thing. It's right. Run the ball and stop the run. I've been a lot of coaches who've won a lot of games. Jim Harbaugh, another one of them. Just be physical, win at the line, and you're going to win most of your games. And then, you need great quarterback play. You need a lot of other things. But the fundamental principle is to run the ball. And that's number one for Kyle, right? He's offensive minded guy. So you control the game with your running game. They controlled that NFC Championship game just by running it 50 times, being able to run it 50 times. He doesn't have a model, like a goal for yardage running the ball. He usually has a goal for how many times you run, because that's game control and stopping the run. And if you let the other team run 40 times, I believe Green Bay ran it 40 times.
Yep,
You're
exactly.
giving up game control. And this is just not what we're used to. Again, there's a lot of reasons for this. We know the injuries. We know there's just the mood's been a little different. We know they're still got talent. We know statistically, yardage wise, they still show like they're like number 7 DVOA or something. I see all these things. I understand that they do get yards. They just don't do it consistently. They're not good enough to pile up first down after first down and
Well, they
get
don't do
the
it in the
other
red
team up.
zone.
They
That's the main
definitely
thing,
don't do it in the red zone.
where it matters absolutely the most.
Yeah,
right?
and that's where the running game. That's how you get touchdowns in the red zone. You run it. You run it when the defense knows you're running it, because it's just hard to complete passes in that constricted zone, because you just you can't throw it deep. And this has got to be problem. This is obviously the problem of this season. I don't know that they can fix this. I think this season is going away very quickly. They've still got talent though, David. Like, they can't throw it away. And they do, I think they do need to start planning for next season. Again, that gets some people mad. And I'm sure Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch don't want to hear it. But I think they do have to start thinking about next year. Doesn't mean don't play all your guys. But I think Christian McCaffrey does not need to be in 98% of the time. Jordan Mason, I kind of resisted this because you had to see if Christian McCaffrey could save them. He's not saving them. That's not happening. He's not quite where he's been. Obviously, he's been out for a while. The offensive line isn't quite right. They're not getting the same amount of action out of him in the passing game. I don't, you can run Jordan Mason 8 times. I don't know why you wouldn't, and it takes some wear and tear off of Christian McCaffrey. There are other things you can do. It doesn't mean, again, you're giving up. You're not tanking. They're not going to move very far up the draft order right now. There's just too many bad teams. But you can make some adjustments to give yourself a better lead up to 2025, because we've just seen that Brady was talking about on the telecast, and like a lot of things he said on telecast, surprisingly to me, I completely agreed. It's the accumulation of all these postseasons on all these guys. It's the wear and tear, and mentally too. And I'll put in financially. The Brandon Ayuk thing probably does not happen unless they go to the Super Bowl previously. So Ayuk says, okay, you want another trip to the Super Bowl? You better pay me. You better pay me. And I'm going to cause all this problem, and you're still going to pay me. That's his right. That's up to him. I think that messed up a lot of the season mentally. And I think these things just gather and gather and gather. And some teams are good enough to get through them. Not many. Usually the ones with Patrick Mahomes, and that's it. And some teams, it just weighs them down. And we're seeing a weighed down team.
You know what the Chiefs have that the 49ers don't are the trophies. And I think that from a psychological standpoint, when you actually win,
Yep.
that does give you a second wind that has to help. There's nothing more damaging and exhausting than playing a full 20 game season. And the 49ers played 3 of those in a row. So 60 games in 3 seasons, and then losing at the very end. I mean, we were both in the locker room in Philadelphia.
Oof, that was rough.
And that was
Yeah,
in
that was rough. That was
2022. That was the crushing scene for the
yeah,
49ers. And then at the Super Bowl was even worse.
yep, yep.
So you put all that strain on the franchise physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, and then you lose at the end. Whereas the Chiefs have 3 trophies since that 2019 season. So, yeah, they've gone through 60 games in 3 seasons as well. They're the only other team to have done that over 3 years, but I think it helps to win 2 Super Bowls over those 3
Yeah,
seasons for
and
Kansas
it's
City.
confidence that you can do it and that you have a little allowance, right? If you struggle a little bit, play a little poorly, you know you have that trophy, you can get back to it. I've talked about this with Warriors people. I've talked about this on podcasts and live streams before. The Warriors are, I've talked to them. They're very fortunate that they won it the first time they went. If they had lost it in 15 and then lose it again in 16, it begins to pile up. It begins like, oh my God, we're doing all this and we're playing all these games, we're wearing all this down and we haven't won it. And my God, what if we can't do it? What if we never win? I think some of that's a lot of that is on the 49ers right now. And you got to keep trying. You can't, again, you got great players. You don't stop. But I think you can be wise about 2025 now. I think you can try to line things up as best you can in a way that they were not lined up last season. We can all feel it now, right? It seems self-explanatory. The contract holdout of Trent Williams, the situation with Ayuk was just terrible. McCaffrey is not in training camp and not in the first day. Like these are things that do not happen to a team that's got everything lined up. Some of them are unavoidable. Some of them are just not going to be something, are just going to be something a team has to deal with, especially a good team. They can try to do their best to try to avoid those things. They really don't have a major problematic contract situation other than possibly Brock Purdy. I don't think that's going to be David, and I think you would agree. He does not seem to be the personality who would make this bad. We shall see. They got to come up with the money. But other than that, they've kind of taken Lenore was the other one, and they did it. Jawan Jennings could have been one, and they did it. Those wouldn't have been super major Ayuk level, but they would have been problematic. They don't have those except for the quarterback, and it's set up for them to pay the quarterback and then go into have a much more serene offseason. That's what I'm looking forward to, looking towards. We shall see if that's actually how they kind of go through the next few weeks. Maybe not, but I think that's where this is headed.
Well, on a granular level, if we're going to talk about snap counts, and I know that's what you started with Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, they can't get blown out of the water from the very get-go in these games the way that they did in Green Bay. And this is what I mean by that. The defense completely lost control of that game from essentially the second snap when they ran the delay to Josh Jacobs. And I think they caught the 49ers in a blitz to the wrong gap, and Jair Brown missed the tackle. Anyway, there are 39 plays. The first 39 plays of that game, 33 of them came with Green Bay controlling the ball. They ran 33 of the first 39 plays, which put the 49ers at a huge disadvantage. They had run 6 plays offensively, and they're already down 17-0. So I think they were only able to run the ball, I think 15 or 16 total times in the whole game. Christian McCaffrey had 11 of those carries.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to give Mason more time, if you want to start working in younger guys into the lineup, you actually have to have the ball. And they were so uncompetitive defensively for the first half of that game that it just screwed everything else up. So the first things first, they have to be competitive in these games moving forward. You don't have to necessarily beat Buffalo to inspire hope for the future. You probably don't even have to beat Buffalo to technically stay in this race, because the entire NFC West is so mediocre, although they are in last place, staring up at 3 teams. But you do have to be competitive. And I think that was what was most disappointing for the 49ers on Sunday. I think we just heard John Lynch talk about it on KNBR. He said, I didn't really believe this part of what he said. He said, we had what we needed to go and get the job done in Green Bay. I beg to differ. I think that you do need Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa to beat a good team like that on the road. But we didn't do it. And he was disappointed with how badly they got beaten in all phases of the game. And that's where I agree. Even if you don't go and win in Green Bay, don't get embarrassed. And the run defense got embarrassed. And then essentially every single phase of the game as a domino effect got embarrassed beyond that. So if we're talking about this on a step-by-step basis, how do they retool while simultaneously contending? Because obviously the standings are still tight. You have to make sure that you don't have the bottom falling out like it did in Green Bay. And I think that started with the run defense against the Packers.
Yeah, and man, it sure could in Buffalo. You could play pretty good and lose by 2 touchdowns in Buffalo, given that situation. And we know Josh Allen. We know what's on. They're pretty hot right now. They're rested. I do think it's a severe disappointment. I thought the 49ers would at least start off well in Green Bay. You get a good package for Brandon Allen. That is clearly a quarterback that Kyle Shanahan likes. He's not even thinking about Josh Dobbs. Potentially an interesting. I'm not quite sure why he's so set on Brandon Allen. The ball does come out of his hand nicely, but he's so immobile. He's got a broken finger on his left hand that does create ball security issues. But okay, Kyle Shanahan, we know you can design an offense. We know if you're super focused on getting to a fast start, you can get the offense moving. Defensively, they can buck it up. This is not a super powerful Packers offense. It's talented, but they're not so great in the receiving depth and other things. They didn't do it. They couldn't tackle. They got blown off the ball. They get penalties. They, as you said, they just were completely dominated from the out. And I think that's got to. I mean, Shanahan said it. Like, we're missing gaps in the run game. That is not a great thing for Nick Sorensen to hear that. To hear your coach say that right off the bat, and to say Fred Warner say something like, "We had to make some adjustments. We weren't ready for this." That's not good. And you got to give the Packers their credit. They were coached well. They played well. They got talented players, but they're not the Lions. They're not the Chiefs. They're not the Bills. Even with a backup quarterback, I expected the 49ers to start better. They finished middle of the game, let's say, was better than you would have thought. Then they started turning the ball over like crazy. But they were not competitive, and that is a really, really underlying thing, I think, for everybody kind of doing some assessing here. Whether it's about Nick Sorensen, I think we've all kind of made our decisions on Brian Schneider, the special teams, because I just got an email from somebody saying, "Hey, how come Brian Schneider's not getting criticism?" I'm like, what are you talking about? He's basically been fired for like 2 months now in the 49er, atmosphere here. It's just that guy, if he's back, wow, if he's back at 2025, that would be the surprise, the upset of the year. Maybe some other changes too. I would suspect there's going to be some other changes on the coach staff too.
Yeah, this next month plus is going to be fascinating for the 49ers. The schedule, it's interesting too. Obviously, you've got this test against Buffalo. You mentioned today on social media that a loss is already baked into the prediction formulas for the 49ers. They're not expected to win. They're touchdown underdogs in Buffalo. So it's a free shot for them. And if Brock Purdy plays and if Nick Bosa plays, then you can't discount the possibility of an upset. It's a free shot for them to maybe thrust their way back into the race. But assuming they lose, I think we're both going to predict in our Friday column that the 49ers will lose. You can surprise people if you thought the difference.
I'm going to pull one. Come on. 37-35, late field goal by Jake. No, probably not.
Assuming they lose, this is 5-7. Now, I also wouldn't be shocked, by the way, if the entire NFC West lost this weekend. Two of the teams are playing off against teams coming off byes, or 3 of the teams are, including the 49ers. And then there's a game at Minnesota. So this could be an 0-4 weekend for the division, and we might be in the same exact situation standings-wise when we're evaluating the NFC West next week. The 49ers will then play the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams is going to come to town. Then the Los Angeles Rams are going to come in on Thursday right after that, divisional matchup. Trip to Miami to face Mike McDaniel and the surging Dolphins. They play at Green Bay on Thursday night here on Thanksgiving. And then Detroit comes in, followed by the finale at Arizona for the 49ers. So a handful of intriguing home games, a couple really winnable home games, but one that would be extremely daunting, Detroit, who's surged this year while the 49ers have regressed. I think it lines up really well, Tim, for evaluation, because you're going to get this mixed bag of worse teams, but nobody that's really bottom barrel anymore, and then a true juggernaut in the Lions coming in. So I think that this is, regardless of whether or not the 49ers somehow fight their way back into the playoff picture, there will be plenty of opportunities to see them going up against the league's best, and you're going to get to evaluate younger players, the 2024 draft class, which I think has been a success already. Those
Absolutely.
guys have done what the 49ers needed them to do. It's been the lack of availability of superstars, I think, that's actually done more to sink the 49ers this year. So I'm actually really looking forward to just covering this team for the next 5-6 weeks, because regardless of what happens, it will be interesting, and it will all be the prelude to what can be done immediately following that Week 18 game against Arizona, and that is Brock Purdy is going to be eligible to sign a new deal as soon as the regular season ends.
Yeah, Purdy obviously huge. I think the die is cast. He's going to get a top salary. Will at least will want one and probably will deserve one. We shall see. I think that can be done pretty quickly. Garoppolo was done really quickly. Remember that after the
Mm-hmm.
17 season, I thought it might take a while, and was like boom in March. He had his new deal. Another thing I'm going to point out: Jay Greenlaw getting out on the field. It's not going to be Sunday, I would not imagine, but maybe quickly after that. And just to see him run around, he's a free agent. Obviously, he's been a huge missing part of this 49ers defense. Not that they could have expected him to come back, because he did tear his Achilles in the Super Bowl. But what does he look like? Is he anything close? And maybe he's sort of close, but not enough for another team to give him a huge deal. So he comes back to the 49ers. So then you get Dre Greenlaw back, maybe at full speed, and you have him running around with Warner. And that we know how dangerous that twosome can be. I think Warner had played great at the beginning of the season. He has not played great recently. A lot of missed tackles on Sunday. Looks like he could really use a full tilt partner in the linebacking corps.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not have one. I'm really interested to see Greenlaw. That's one guy, when I say rest some guys or whatever, he doesn't need rest. He needs snaps. He needs reps. He needs to feel the football game again. And I want to see that. Then, I want to see, Ricky Pearsall, he played a lot on Sunday, didn't do anything. You want to see Jacob Cowing get back from the concussion and get out there. You want to see, there are other people to see, even though they played a lot of young guys. Jordan Mason, I brought up. I just think that there is a lot to see while not giving up, and they should evaluate it. They've got some decisions to make. They've got a lot of holes to fill with different avenues to do it. But man, hey, listen, Deebo Samuel has not exactly made a great push to remain on this team next season in the last few weeks. I think he's somebody they really like. Obviously, one of Kyle Shanahan's favorite players. Hadn't looked real good. And Eric Armstead kind of fizzled at the end of last season. And guess what? He was cut. I don't know that that's what's going to happen with Deebo Samuel. We've all sort of pointed at that, knowing that the Brock Purdy contract is coming. But these are things to look at. They've kind of made some of the decisions already. As I mentioned, Lenore and Jawan Jennings. That's smart. Get ahead of the curve on that. There's some other decisions to go. We got some questions piling up now, Dave. Let's
Finally,
see.
yeah.
Yeah,
We're
how
waiting
about
for some to come in. I like this one. Given the holdout and injury to Trent Williams, the regression of Aaron Banks and Jake Brendel, and the success of Dominic Pooney, do you believe the 49ers mentality will change going into this upcoming offseason and draft? Well, I mean,
Dave, that's a theme of mine. That's a theme. Go ahead. That's a theme of mine, but go ahead.
Yeah, but they did draft Dominic Pooney already last year, and that was a direct response to the fact that they were really struggling on the right side of the line, interior-wise. At right tackle, too, Pooney has been a godsend for the 49ers, a third-round draft pick who has upgraded to the right guard position from terrible to above average while simultaneously helping right tackle get better. So they made an investment in the offensive line that's paid off. But unfortunately for them, as this anonymous commenter points out, they have seen a regression at both center and left guard. So now the problem has shifted to the left. And I think that more of the same, more draft investment in the offensive line, maybe even more aggressive investment in the offensive line than the third round pick is going to be the only way out of this. But I have watched a lot of the cut ups now, Tim, and I see the numbers too. I think, and I see the history. Kyle Shanahan has insisted in the past on spending money on a center. That's been one of his premium positions. Brendel worked out on a cost efficient basis for the past 2 seasons before this, but the play has regressed at center, and it would shock me if the 49ers did not try to take a bigger swing to upgrade that this offseason.
Yeah, we know that their philosophy is not to spend a lot of capital, draft or financial, on the offensive line unless it's for Trent Williams, or John, Alt. They would have drafted him, I think, but only those guys, and the rest I think they can coach. Draft a guy in the 4th round, coach him. Draft a guy in the 6th round, coach him. Get a free agent, coach him. I think Purdy can help change some of that because he was a top 75 pick, whatever he was, top 80 pick, and he's plugged right in. They hit with that. Banks was good last year, less good this year. Another top, was he top 70 pick? I can see them saying, if we're better at this now, let's go get. They got some. They need somebody to replace Trent Williams eventually, right?
And Banks is a free agent.
And Banks is a free agent. This is kind of a combo Kawakami, Matt Barrow solution here. I've said in the past, draft a right tackle, move McKivitz to right guard, and as Barrows adds, and then move Purdy to left guard. I think he's maybe a more natural left guard. So you kind of fix 3 positions with one draft pick, maybe a 1st round pick even. They're going to have like 16, maybe even higher than that, 14, 12. Maybe that's the place where you get the 2nd best tackle instead of where they were last year and you get the 5th best tackle. And I know they did not want to do that. They don't believe in overdrafting just for position if it's that position. If they're going to overdraft somebody, it's going to be a receiver, and they probably did with Pearsall, or it's going to be defensive line. It's not going to be at that position. Well, maybe at 14, you get that guy, and you can plug him in at right tackle. And again, you can move McKivitz to right guard. He's probably going to be better than if you're talking about Aaron Banks at left guard, because you move Purdy to left guard. Then you still got to invest in a center. And knowing Shanahan, he's not going to want a rookie there, but we'll see. I think all of a sudden you see a plan to make for upgrades across the line. Other than Trent Williams, where you obviously do not have to upgrade. At some point, you also need someone who can play left tackle in 2 years. Which
is why a high pick on a tackle that can play right tackle makes sense, right?
And then he's the future left tackle. Absolutely. Yep. So these are all things. Although I'll say Jalen Moore looked pretty good on Sunday. I got to give the guy credit. He was the least of their worries.
He was the only lineman that played well. Yep. Both run blocking and pass blocking.
Every time I was watching from TV, I wasn't live, but you just saw his number. That, it's a credit. If you don't see another jersey, all you see is his number moving forward. That means he's blocking whoever he's supposed to, because there's nobody getting around him. I don't know if he's the future left tackle, but I was impressed with him in that game.
Definitely somebody that could consider re-upping just to be a swing tackle if they feel, he was playing tight end the week before, which is
not well
a move that I vehemently disagreed with. That's something we could catch up on right now. I don't think that this has been Kyle Shanahan's best season play calling either. I think that obviously he's been dealt with not the best hand here, right? With all these injuries, but he has gone away from a lot of the shorter passing game that has allowed the 49ers to click whenever their backs have been up against the wall. They've thrown the fewest screens in all football. Shanahan said the other day that it's because defenses are so geared up for those screen passes, but they gear up for screen passes against Mahomes and the Chiefs too, because they haven't been threatening downfield nearly as much without Tyreek Hill. And the Chiefs have still thrown the most screens in the NFL. And I think that's made life a lot easier for Mahomes, given the weaponry that he has. And I think that's something that the 49ers shouldn't be last in the league in, right? And I also think that the whole Jalen Moore playing tight end thing against Seattle was a really stubborn way of saying, I'm going to run this scheme. I don't care what the personnel is. We're just going to, go. George Kittle is out, so I can't. Saubert's tight end 1. I'm still going to run 2 tight ends. I don't care if I have to put a 311 pounder in there. And what happened? Well, Seattle didn't take Jalen Moore seriously. They didn't cover him. And you could say, well, maybe the 49ers should have tried to throw the ball to him. Well, Brendel wasn't pass blocking well enough for Purdy to get that far into his.
And they weren't throwing it. They weren't throwing it to Jalen.
Yeah, and they weren't going to throw to Jalen Moore. And what it did is the insistence to run the same formation and theoretically not lose anything run blocking wise by having Jalen Moore in there, handcuff the passing game. If one of your 5 eligibles is a guy who you're not going to throw to, and the defense also realizes you're not going to throw it to him, that they don't cover him, and then the rest of the field sees much less space, right? So I think in a situation like that against Seattle, where unfortunately George Kittle did not play, embrace the wide receiver position. Run 3 wides, or go with both Mason and Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. Do something a little bit different. You don't have to run the same stuff that you're running with George Kittle, because I'm a firm believer, Tim, that players and talent dictate success in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, scheme can take you so far, but ultimately you have to worship at the altar of the talent, not at scheme.
Yeah,
And I didn't understand Jalen Moore playing so much at tight end. That was my main criticism coming out
that
of that
felt,
game.
and they had other tight ends. Like, we all know they're not great, but Jake Tongas and Braden Willis, I think, were up for that game.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't quite understand that, unless you just think they're terrible. Maybe they are. My overall theory, I have nothing really to prove it, is that Shanahan just got used to having Christian McCaffrey, and it just changed the way he thought. Changed. He just said, "I can just get the ball to 23 here, and if 23 stopped, I get the ball to one." Debo and McCaffrey, and McCaffrey wasn't there, and Debo hasn't been great. And all of a sudden, the stuff that he's just used to calling for 2 years now hasn't worked. He can't go to it. They're not throwing the ball to Jordan Mason in the flat. I don't know why. I think you can't. I think he's been open. I've watched the game. Go, I think he's open over there, but Purdy's looking the other way. It's just kind of broken a gear in the 49ers offense, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we can say, I agree with you. I mean, Shanahan has not adjusted to it, or not wanted to, not had the capability of personnel to do it. Obviously, they lost Ayuk too. We have to say that. But there's something that we see other teams, like, LaFleur, that first couple tries, he's got guys moving misdirection, half over there, back over the other way, clearly confusing the 49ers defense. You have not seen the 49ers do that. And I respect that Shanahan doesn't want to be all fancy. He doesn't really believe in that. He believes in beating you with just the stuff that he calls straight up. But you can't do misdirection. They did a misdirection to Debo and got some yards out of it. Like, you can do some of that. And sometimes you have to, if your personnel isn't as good as the other team. I don't think Kyle likes making that thought. My personnel isn't good enough to win straight up, so I can't do it. He's been right. You really are successful if you have that. If you have a good scheme and you have better players. They don't have better players right now because they're hurt. And we have not seen the creativity. I don't think creativity wins them this game, or the next one, but we haven't really seen that. And I do think McCaffrey adjustment to him, and then now having to kind of adjust to him not being as great as he's been for the last 2 seasons, it's really messed up the 49ers offense. It feels a little bit like, remember the beginning of 2021 when they were struggling? And even I asked Shanahan, like, do you feel like you've gotten in rhythm as a play caller? He goes, no, I haven't. It was a rare moment of semi-vulnerability, which fans are all clamoring for, which I don't think is necessary. But it was interesting because I haven't felt like I'm in rhythm. And then obviously it catches fire in game 6, right? They're 3-5. They're losing to Chicago, and Garoppolo throws a short pass to Debo. He takes it to the house, and all of a sudden the season changes. That has not happened. I don't think it's going to happen this season. I don't think Shanahan's gotten into rhythm. They're getting yards, but they're not in rhythm.
Guess what happened when the 49ers got into rhythm in 2021? The defense morphed from a bottom half unit to a top half unit. And I think this goes back to my earlier point. Green Bay ran 33 of the first 39 plays against the 49ers on Sunday. It's really hard to get into a rhythm if your defense can't get off the field. Yeah. Football is such a complementary sport, right? So Shanahan really lamented the fact that the game flow on Sunday didn't allow him to ground and pound, didn't allow him, they were not on platform to control that game because Green Bay was up 17-0 before their offense even found its bearings. So I think it's really, really important for the 49ers to at least just play competent defense. It doesn't have to be great, but give your offense a chance with the game still within a possession early on to find its footing. And that's how somebody like Shanahan finds his rhythm. Early in 2021, they were bleeding yardage, bleeding points. That was the year where they set the record for pass interference penalties, right? And offenses were just throwing it deep because they were, I called it PI hunting. They were just hunting for pass interference, and it worked. They had like 14 defensive pass interference penalties that season, Tim. It's by far an NFL record. They lost 350 yards in pass interference yardage that year. Like, over 3 football fields worth of yards in
the old
Dre
Kirkpatrick, Josh
Ambry Thomas. Ambry Thomas was a massive upgrade that season. That just gives you perspective for what the 49ers were dealing with. So I think that was a huge part. Obviously, that Garoppolo got hurt early that year, and then Trey Lance had the broken finger, so they were in and out of the lineup. They were trying to run two QBs in the last preseason
The
game.
two
It was
QBs did not
yeah,
work. That did that is
it
not
was all weird that year, but the offense ended up as a top 5 offense with the surge at the end. But I do not think that it was a coincidence that surge happened when the defense also surged, because I think that this is all so connected in football, and they never stood a chance on Sunday. Hey, yeah, I get it. No Trent Williams, no Brock Purdy. But if your defense is giving up that type of yardage on the ground, forget about it. Because then you're giving the replacements, led by Brandon Allen, a 17-0 deficit to work with. And no play caller is going to find his rhythm in that situation.
And all those to say, I mean, we were talking about this, but Shanahan calls one play to set up another play, and then that play is to set up another play. And if you just can't get through the plays, you can't get to the third thing that you're trying to call because the first two didn't do anything. And by that time you get to the third version of it, you're in the fourth quarter. So this is one thing we learned about Shanahan. That's why the two quarterback thing, because remember the plan was going to have Trey Lance get in there for Jimmy, and it's like red zone or short yardage, and he did a couple of times, and Shanahan's just stopped doing it. And he's like, I just don't like how the offense runs when I'm running quarterbacks back out. And I don't think Garoppolo was too thrilled with that either.
No.
So that might have been part of it.
I'm really curious to see if they would have pushed it a bit more in the regular season if Lance had not broken his finger against the Raiders.
Yep.
Because they only ran it. Well, they tried it like 3 times against Detroit in the season opener. It went nowhere.
Yep.
And then Shanahan was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do this. He didn't do it at all in Philadelphia. They won week 2 in Philly that year. Week 3, they came back and they played the Packers on Sunday night, and they couldn't punch it in at the end of the first half from like the 1 or the 2. So Shanahan reluctantly, but did it. He said, we really need a touchdown here because I think they're down 17-0. And he ran Lance quarterback sweep. Remember that? Trent Williams had the great block into the end zone. But that was the last that we saw of it for a really, really long time. And I think you're exactly right. Shanahan said, yeah, I had to force feed that touchdown to Trey Lance, but it was a very specific situation. I don't like how this works from a rhythm perspective, and they didn't do it.
He didn't like it.
Year.
Yeah, he didn't like it. There might have been reasons, Trey is still not playing in the NFL. That's sort of a signal that he wasn't good enough to do that with, even to get a 1 snap. That Garoppolo back then, healthy Garoppolo, was worth having at that point. Interesting stuff. Good to go back through some stuff. Let's get a question here.
Yeah. Robbie, you see that one?
Go pick one there. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys seem to think, this is from Robbie. You guys seem to think it's a done deal. Brock Purdy gets paid. No chance at the 49ers making him play out his contract and tagging him. And if not, in your opinions, does Purdy demand $60 million or does he accept less? I mean, I personally think if everything continues and he stays healthy and he keeps on playing well, because I think he has played well, all the data suggests that he's played well, and the team around him this year just hasn't been as good. The market's the market, and whether or not you're the very best quarterback or the 7th or 8th best quarterback hasn't really mattered when it comes to the quarterback market, Tim. The latest guy has gotten paid the most. Everybody knows Dak Prescott's not the best QB in football, but he was the most recent one to set the market, and he got it at $60 million. So if the market keeps on moving in that direction, I just don't see how Purdy wouldn't get paid that amount of money. I think the 49ers have budgeted it for it, and I think they're going to give him a big signing bonus, and I think they'll do their salary cap machinations to push the cap hit back to where the salary cap has inflated in a few years. To me, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a really complicated deal, just because it's going to follow the precedent of all these other quarterback deals.
I see that, and it's certainly the way it's happened for Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert. We know the names. I've kind of circled the Jalen Hurts situation before last season. Not a first round pick. He was a second round pick. Certainly wasn't a 7th, but comes in kind of unheralded, famous quarterback from college, but not a guy that everyone went, whoa, that's the next guy in the NFL. Wins a lot of games, not a classic drop back, leadership. And he got a huge contract, but he did not break the market. And I'm thinking maybe the Purdy deal could go into that one. The Tagovailoa is another one where, for different reasons, maybe did not break the market. I think there's a way they could do this. We'll see. He's not having the best statistical season at the moment. He's just not. He's like 12th in quarterback rating and some other stats. Like, he's having a fine year. He's important to them. He's not having, a great year. Sometimes that doesn't matter, as you point out. It's almost impossible for them to replace him. That's going to be true. If he wants to make it tough, they are not going to want to go into training camp without him signed. They're not going to want to go into March without him signed, because if they don't have him signed, if there's a question, they got to go get another quarterback. That's where the Daniel Jones thing is interesting to me. But I'm putting that aside. That does not seem to fit what they would want. Brock Purdy fits what they would want. I think it's just all logic is this gets done. I'm saying maybe not at 60, maybe at 52, which is, I think, Tagovailoa or Hurts is 51, right in there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the agent and the family just say, no, we got to get the top dollar. I would understand it. You got to get what you can. Players' careers are short. Quarterbacks are less short, but I understand it. I just think he fits everything they want. And if they don't have him, they'd have to get somebody else. And they're going to trade 3 first-round picks and draft Trey Lance again? Like, these are not positions you can screw around with. They know this more than anybody. I don't know that Brock Purdy is going to demand the biggest salary. And if you start doing the franchise tag thing, you start having quarterbacks play out, you are basically saying he's not going to be the long-term answer. That is what happens. You can argue with it. You can say, no, it shouldn't be like that. That's what happens. I think Lamar Jackson was one of the ones that have stayed, and that got pretty bitter. I don't think the 49ers want to go through that with a quarterback who fits Shanahan so well. The only holdup I would say, and I don't want to get aggregated or light anything up, if the 49ers are not sure that Kyle Shanahan is going to be the coach for much longer, I think he's going to be in the next season. If there's some questions about that, maybe you don't say, okay, his perfect quarterback is the one we have to commit to. It would be an interesting signal if they just say, we're not doing Purdy for, we're not going to extend it and we're going to get ready to franchise tag him. To me, that would be a signal about what they're thinking long-term about the coach and GM. To me, it would be. Maybe I'd be reading it wrong. I don't think they have those questions. I think the owner actually likes Purdy a lot. So maybe I'm overstating this, but I think there's just a way to do this, get him at 55, 53, and you go with the guy that you know so well and has led you to so many victories and hasn't been great this season. But even at his worst, David, if this is a bad season for him, it's pretty good. I think there's maybe 20 teams that would take it right now.
Yeah. And I mean, and you saw what happened on Sunday without him. They got beaten like
Yes.
It was 2017 or 2018 again. And I think that really underscored how much he's been masking this season. A lot of this, and this is not good for the 49ers, but it's given me late stage Pete Carroll Seahawks vibes, where Russell Wilson was in his prime and the offensive line was decaying. The defense was decaying. And Russell Wilson was running for his life, making a lot of great plays, and obviously also making some not so great plays. But the structure around him wasn't as it was back when the Seahawks went all the way in that 2013 season, and then back to the Super Bowl in 2014. Yeah, those 2 years in the Super Bowl. But Russell Wilson always had the highest time to throw in the league because he was running around trying to look for guys to get open. Brock Purdy this year has the highest time to throw in the league. The air yardage has gone way up. All symptoms that we see coming from the stylistic nature of this 49ers offense have indicated that way more is being placed on the quarterback this year because of either play calling or talent or blocking deficiencies elsewhere, probably a mix of all three, which is why it's so hard to evaluate quarterbacks just in the vacuum of 1 year. You kind of look at the big picture, and obviously Purdy was working with a different set of circumstances in 2022 and 2023. Now he's working with this set of circumstances in 2024. I think we're in agreement, though, Tim, that they're going to find a way to get something done. I think there's question about where the exact price point's going to be, but they're going to find a way to get something done. They're not going to try to let this go into
24-year-old quarterback who's made the Pro Bowl recently. I think
MVP
the way you
finalist.
I think the way you can sell a lot of things in your own mind, if you're Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch or Jed York or the fan base or the locker room, Brock Purdy in his prime, and you beef up the offensive line. That's a nice way to start. That's a nice way to start.
That's what Kansas City did. Kansas City lost the Super Bowl the year after they played the 49ers. They got worked in the Super Bowl. That was against the
Tampa Bay.
Bucks.
Yeah, yeah.
David and that defense, Shaq Barrett coming off the edge, Antoine Winfield. That was a really good defense, but Patrick Mahomes never stood a chance. You know, the Chiefs scored 9 points. That was a Mahomes offense, that people think can do no wrong in the playoffs. Well, they did a lot of wrong that year. They couldn't block for their quarterback. So Russell Wilson just happened to actually be at that game. He was sitting with Roger Goodell. I remember that was a big deal. And then he wanted the Seahawks to invest more in the offensive line then, and the Chiefs definitely did invest in that O-line. And it's helped them net 2 Super Bowls even after losing Tyreek Hill. So they've gone down on the weaponry, right? The weaponry is not what it used to be for Kansas City back when they faced the 49ers in 2019, but they've beefed up the front. It might be the best pass blocking line in football. If not, it's close to it. They got really good guards. They're especially good on the interior. That's where the 49ers have been weaker, and it's allowed Kansas City to win sustainably moving forward. So the 49ers in some ways have gotten better in pass protection this year than last year, but the run blocking has regressed, especially in the middle. And Shanahan runs an adaptable offense. He needs the run blocking to be there. It sets up the pass protection. It sets up the pass plays. So I absolutely think that an approach like that, I think you're right on it. I think that's something that the 49ers have to take seriously.
The last few weeks of penalties, the offensive line penalties have just destroyed them because they're not gaining yards at the clip. They're not picking first downs at the clip. And then when you put them backwards, they're definitely not going to get the first downs. And I can just see this. Use a first round pick on a tackle. Feel like you're improving entire offensive line with the juggling that I talked about. And you've got at that point, a 25-year-old quarterback. You got Brandon Ayuk coming back. You got Christian McCaffrey, who presumably will not have that much pounding on his legs this season. And then you try to fix the defense a little bit. It doesn't need a huge fix. Maybe Robert Saleh's defensive coordinator, maybe Jeff Ulbricht's defensive coordinator, as I've thrown out there. What if Bill Belichick's the defensive coordinator? Like there's some interesting ways you could look at this. I mean, we know that Shanahan looked at all of this last offseason and couldn't get any. He looked at Steve Spagnuolo last offseason, end up with Nick Sorensen. I don't think he's a terrible coordinator. He could be growing on the job. I don't think it's a green flag for him into next season. I'll put it that way. So we'll see. I just can see the steps here, and maybe that's agitating the fans who still want to concentrate on this season. I just think it's a smart play to start thinking about next season. Let's try to get a couple more questions in here. Anonymous. Could the argument be made that the reason why Kyle hasn't been creative this season is because the offense is routinely screwed up staple plays? So how can they be trusted to execute more creative, intricate ones? Oh, it's not anonymous. It's Kevin M. just signed on as anonymous. Basically, it's kind of stuff we talked about, David. Like the staple plays are being stopped. I still think Shanahan is stubborn about these plays will work. They will work. It's what is. He doesn't want to become kind of an untethered offense. He just doesn't want, let's just kind of do this and kind of fly by night and that is not him. That's why they're very consistent. That's why they win so many games, is because they don't get untethered. And then you don't see them just kind of, I don't know what they believe in. I don't know what they do. He wants to have principles about what they do. It hasn't been great in the red zone, but again, they're getting yards. They are getting yards. They're still up there in those rankings. Obviously, it doesn't mean much if you're not winning games, but I cannot see Shanahan going away from the stuff that he loves to do. I cannot see it. He's just got to do it better. And maybe a couple times you work off of it instead of just like we talked about. They've gotten away from this now. How many times they get in the red zone, 1st and 10, run for nothing. 1st and 10, run for -1. They did it like 7 straight times. They are not doing it the last few games. They're trying to throw from there. Obviously, when you're Brandon Allen, that's going to be a little more complicated. But this is what coordinating is like believing in stuff and then working off of it. But you've got to believe in the stuff.
You nailed it on the head there. The runs up the middle that don't work, that goes back to center and left guard regressing this year. I think that they have a big interior O-line problem. And the question was, the 49ers have routinely screwed up staple plays. Well, the reason they're routinely screwing up staple plays like interior runs that aren't gaining what they need to gain, or even some of the perimeter runs that aren't gaining what they need to gain, is because they have not run blocked to the level that they have run blocked in years prior. It's all over the tape. And that relates to another question from Robbie. He says, why is Jake Brendel still the starting center? Well, the 49ers might have had a substitution plan for Brendel with John Feliciano, but Feliciano was done for the season. He had knee surgery earlier on. They opened up his return from IR practice window 3 weeks ago. They had 3 weeks to see if he could work his way back to the 53-man roster. But yesterday they announced that his knee just hasn't responded the way that it needed to. So there's going to be no John Feliciano. He's on IR for the rest of the year. Remember, it was last year, the biggest weakness on the offensive line was Spencer Burford at right guard. And it was Feliciano who around this time of the year took over for him as the starting right guard. So I think that Brendel was surprisingly good in 2022. He was actually in the top 10 in all the pass blocking numbers. He slid last year. He was around the middle of the pack. Then he was dealing with knee tendonitis all off season, missed a lot of the off season program, and just, has now regressed toward the bottom of the rankings. And we see on tape all the issues the 49ers have. It wouldn't have shocked me if John Feliciano had stepped in. He's played center before, but Feliciano is not healthy enough to play this year. So you don't have any other realistic options to play at that center position if you're the 49ers. So I think that they're just stuck with that situation for right now.
Yeah, well, I'll go through my thing with Jalen Moore. Like, I just saw his uniform on those plays. You never saw him turned around. I'll see him looking behind him. How many times do you see Jake Brendel like turning around and you see his guy moving past him, and you see, that 64, right? He's 64, and you see 64 in a position where he's not blocking anybody. It's because he's lost the block already. That happens way too much. They've got to get another center. And I think that'll be something. I don't think centers are that tough to find. Maybe the right one's tough to find, but they do hit the market. And I can see Shanahan trying to get a veteran center to just try to tighten things up there, maybe invest again in other ways on the line. But at center, I don't see him going to a rookie. I see him going to somebody that he believes in. Alex Mack, that would be the model. And guy near the end of his career can play the zone blocking technique and is smart enough to just jump right in there. I don't know if there is another one out there, but I can definitely see Shanahan and Lynch saying that's how we get our center. He's so,
he's so
a 32-year-old guy who can give us 2 more seasons.
Yeah, and he's so specific, Tim, with what he needs at center, because they put a ton of responsibility on the center that a lot of other teams
right?
don't.
The protections.
Yeah, the protections. He identifies the safety rotations. It's a really hard thing. Think about just the technical aspect of this job. You're running up the football, and then you bend down because you've got to snap it. So your eye level is what, 2-3 feet off the ground. You have to be able to see through a crowd of guys to see the safety rotation, point it out, make the protection call based on what you gather. So that's a really, really difficult job to do, especially in a complex scheme, right? It's not the simplest stuff that you're having to identify and then set at the line of scrimmage. It takes a lot off the quarterback, but there's a reason why Shanahan went for Alex Mack. He had worked with him twice prior in Cleveland and then in Atlanta. There's a reason why they paid really big money to Weston Richburg, who was fantastic for them until he got hurt, right, in 2018, because they thought he could be exactly what they needed. And he was. And then he got hurt in 2019. And that, to me, that was a huge blow to the 49ers, because you spent all this money on a tailor-made guy for your center position, and they didn't get that position right again until they got Mack in 2021. And then Mack retired. So they felt that, okay, Brendel's super athletic. This guy might be able to work out, and he did for a year. And then and you could argue 2 years. They were good enough to win the Super Bowl with him last year. They obviously didn't get it done, but it wasn't Jake Brendel's fault. But this season, the play just isn't up to the level that the 49ers need it to be. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah, you mentioned the protections. That someone did ask some question. I'm not looking at it now, but I know it's been a big thing bubbling around 49er land. Should Purdy have more ability to change protections, one, or to just change into another play that's not in the number of plays that Shanahan gives him? He basically has an A play and a B play. He can get out of A if you hear it. Can. They're canning the A play. They're going to the B play. It's a really complicated thing, and I've talked to Shanahan maybe the most about it of anybody. I just don't think he thinks he can take that off the quarterback by having the 2 plays. And the quarterback has the right to change it, but then you have to practice it all. Like, you have to invest hours and hours in that You have to invest in what the call is when the quarterback does it. You have to invest in every player knowing what the other play call is going to be. You have to invest in getting the
Yeah.
personnel right for all that. There are quarterbacks who do that. I mean, Peyton Manning, whatever, maybe Brady a little bit, but probably not that as much as
It's
you think.
very
Yeah,
rare.
yeah, it's just not what you do in this NFL, and you get away from practicing what they do, which is the A play and the B play. I don't know how they call it, but in my head, it's A play, it's a B play. You go up to the line, you have the A play. If the defense is in a bad alignment for that, you go to the B play. That's what they do. And there's a hot route for both. Like if you get a blitz coming, you have an automatic throw. I realize there's been some problems with that, but there's also problems if you do it the other way. Because if you audible into a play that two other guys don't know, or you're taking all this practice time away from the other stuff, you limit yourself. This is the way Shanahan's going to do it. Purdy, as he gets into this, might have more responsibility, but as Purdy and Shanahan both say, do you really want to have all that responsibility? Because if the quarterback screws it up, then he feels terrible about it, and he's got to run the next play. So I understand the agitation when it doesn't work in a Super Bowl. When Steve Spagnuolo calls something double blitz up the A gap, and there's a hot read, and the hot read doesn't work. It's an automatic hot read, and maybe the defense knows where it's coming. But when you got Christian McCaffrey on a hot read or Deebo Samuel on a hot read, they can break a tackle and go for 50 against a vulnerable defense.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to, someone asked that. I don't think that, they're against it completely ever happening in a 2-minute drill, as Purdy mentioned to me. Like a 2-minute drill, things are happening fast. Maybe that's the way to do it. But then you got to practice it. Like that's one thing that they emphasize. You've got to invest the time in it, which means you're taking it away from something else. So be aware of that. They're not going to do it very often. Maybe a little bit more as Purdy grows into this, and mostly in 2-minute, but they're going to do the way they do it because they do it very well. There's just been 5 plays over the last few years where specifically Steve Spagnuolo and Brian Flores, who are tough coordinators on everybody, but specifically tough on Shanahan's system. I don't know that you change everything you do for that. Maybe you alter how you handle that, but you don't change how you handle that.
Yeah, you gradually build onto the existing system as Purdy has more and more experience under his belt. You don't blow up the system that had you as a top 5 offense in 2021, the number 1 offense in all of football in 2022, the number 1 offense in all of football in 2023. And this season, despite the red zone issues, which we've talked about the interior line play, there's still a top 6, top 7 offense this season. Like it would be complete insanity, as you mentioned, to
and Purdy's
blow
really
something
good.
up. And
Yeah, Purdy's really good at this too. Like, who knows if he'd be good doing the other stuff.
The hot read system would be fine if the hot reads were a little bit better in some of these situations. And there was one in the Super Bowl that probably was on Brock Purdy, the 3rd and 4 with McDuffie blitzing. The correct hot read to go to was Brandon Ayuk on the slant. You go rewatch the play. Ayuk is wide open on the slant. Purdy, I think it's because McDuffie did a great job disguising.
Face, right? Well, he's also in his face,
and
right?
Purdy went to Jennings, right? Yeah. He went outside the Jennings instead.
He went because McDuffie's coming up, so he's got to kind of throw around McDuffie, I think, to Ayuk, and he's throwing to the side if it's Jennings. I think that was part of it too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, the main point is that the answers are built into these plays by design. I don't think the answers this year have been the best from Shanahan, and I think that you've got to continually adapt the system to scheme better answers in. I don't think the system itself is broken because this has been one of the most efficient offenses in football, if not the most efficient offense in football over the past few seasons. So you don't need to blow up something that is already working at a high level, but you do need to tweak it because the league is a constant chess match. And I think right now it's Shanahan's turn to make a move. I think that right now he needs to regain the position advantage, and we've seen it happen before. Anyway, we're wrapping up here, Tim. We got 30 more seconds. I think that we got to...
I want to get that last one because it's been bubbling around.
I get it.
We don't want to commit too much time to this because they're not going to change it very much. But I appreciate the conversation about it, and because I've asked Shanahan specifically about it, and that's the number 1 most direct answer he's ever given on it that I know of, and I have asked Purdy about it. I don't think Purdy's that interested in doing it, frankly. Like, I don't think quarterbacks want this on it because, as he said, you better have a good answer to Kyle when you come back off the field if you do something like that. And Kyle's probably going to have a better answer than you do. And even his B play might be better than, and a hot read off a B play is probably going to be better than if you change everything. You get out of formation, you've got the wrong personnel, and then you're trying to run something. The conversation is interesting. It's worth going through in your head, but I believe that's the way they do it. We'll see if you can't change it all now, but maybe there will be some adjustments next season. And I do believe that most of these people will be back next season for an interesting go around in 2025.
The chess match continues. All right, that's it for us today. Everybody, make sure you go and follow along at the San Francisco Standard, all the social media channels, wherever you're watching now, sfstandard.com to check out all of our work. Tim, thank you. It's been
Thank you,
fun.
David.
We'll talk
As
to you
always,
soon.
thanks for the questions, everybody. Talk to you soon.